Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Super Feeler podcast. My name is Laurie, and I'm super excited today to be joined by an old friend of mine, Sonia, who we actually worked together on a project, I want to say 8 years ago now, maybe. It was a child and youth mental health and substance use project in British Columbia, Canada. Sonia recently reached out to me around some of the stigma around borderline personality disorder that she experienced as a learner in a Masters of Counselling program. So I'm super thankful for your allyship, for asking me to come and speak to your class. I think it's just a huge win on all sides, and I really appreciate it. I know a lot of other people who have gone through that program and haven't done that, which is super interesting. You were just going above and beyond. So yeah, I do really want to learn a little bit about you. Do you want to just talk a little bit about yourself and what brought you here and all that?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it's been 8 years. Has it really been 8 years, Laurie?
I think so. I think it was like 2015. Maybe it's 9 years, 2015 or 2016.
Okay.
I know it's a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can just get into why I am in the program that I am in right now, which is a Masters of Counselling. I have had lived experience with various different mental health challenges, the common ones, depression, anxiety, and now diagnosis ADHD, as a lot of women are experiencing right now, which has been fun, I guess. But yeah, I also have a lot of experience in family with suicide, bipolar, and various different mental health challenges. So that coupled with my professional experience after my undergrad, which was completely unrelated to what I'm doing now, I kind of realized that helping people through challenges was something that really resonated with me. So that's kind of why I decided to go down this pathway.
Was your undergrad in sciences?
It was in basically sustainable agriculture, which is so 180 from what I'm in now.
Yeah.
But
so cool though.
Yeah. But it did help me. I will say though, that degree did help me get into a career that my first job out of undergrad, which really helped me figure out, I really like helping people. And that was in a land-based program, working with a lot of populations that face barriers. Like I worked with majority Indigenous folks and BIPOC folks and folks that were living with different barriers. And I realized I actually really like that connection piece and helping folks through their challenges. So I think it in a way kind of got me to where I am.
Totally. I mean, I think most people that go into counseling have lived experience in some way, right? Whether it's yourself or your family, just because,
Totally.
Yeah, we go into this for a reason, right?
Yeah.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about your program? We won't be mentioning the school's name here, but just maybe some context of how the program works and then the education around BPD that you were having.
So the school is all online, but we do meet every day face to face. So basically, I'm in a cohort where I see Tuesday to Friday every day between 3 and 6 hours, which is really great because, going through a master's program with the same group of people has been really great. And I think I wouldn't want to have it any other way. I know there's some programs that you mostly just work on your own and it's all online and it's asynchronous. I think that's the term.
Yeah.
Where you work on it all on your own. I think that would be very isolating, especially in a program that's so intense and there's just a lot of emotions that can be brought up in the program. So, and also you're just gaining so much experience and learning from other people in the program. I think that's just so important. So that part of the program has been so fantastic and it's all virtual. So I was able to move out of the city and kind of go back into a space where I felt closer to nature and it was better for my self-care. So that part I've really appreciated.
I can cut this, but where do you live now? Squamish?
No, I live on the Sunshine Coast, which is on Squamish territory.
Beautiful. Yeah. Oh my God. Okay, cool.
Yeah. It's been
Awesome.
honestly such a blessing. And I think it's really helped my mental health, not being in Vancouver anymore.
100%. I'm in Abbotsford now and I live pretty in a weird nature-y subdivision that's pretty far from everything. And it's a game changer to not be in the city. And I've never even lived in Vancouver, but even Surrey, I'm absolutely not. I could never do that again.
Yeah, no, I think it's been such a it's been a great change, honestly. And I don't think I would ever move back to Vancouver, honestly. Prices
No.
aside, I don't think I would.
Yeah, it's not just that you can't,
No,
it's
it's
that
like
you
I
don't
can't
want
afford
to.
rent anymore if I wanted to
Yeah,
move back.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Totally. Yeah, awesome. So, yeah, so you're in a program that's so flexible, which is amazing
Mhm.
for the purposes of like actually getting to live your life outside of work or outside of school. There are in-person cohorts for this program though as well, right?
There is, yes. So their virtual cohorts are relatively new from my understanding. Like COVID is what, sparked
Right.
that branch of the program. But originally I was looking into the in-person ones, and then I realized, okay, if I did do a virtual one, then I don't have to be close to a city then, and I can kind of prioritize other things in my life and other things that you know, wanted to do. So that's kind of the direction I did. I will say the downside to virtual is like you don't get those little like coffee chats at hangouts after class. Like you don't get that as much, but I will say my cohort is we're so close for being virtual that it's probably as close as we could get without having that. So that's been nice.
Totally. Yeah, my master's was like supposed to be fully in person, but then COVID happened. And so the first year and a half was like fully online. And honestly, like we were able to build that relationship virtually. Like it was amazing. And it was kind of nice to see them in person kind of near the end, but it wasn't necessary. Like I could have done the whole program virtually and still built really strong connections with people.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's been really great that way. Our cohort is just, yeah, so supportive. We got a hilarious bunch and we're all kind of like suffering through together some of the really challenges that come with any master's program, right? So, yeah, that in that way it's been really great.
Totally. And are you working at the same time?
No, I decided not to. I It's tough because it's sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, my wallet really is telling me that I really should be working. But yeah, I think the majority of our program, like the folks in our program, actually aren't working anymore. Some
Mm.
people did try, and then it just was like so intense that they realized they couldn't work at the same time. There is a virtual weekend cohort that
Mm.
is more catered to people that are working still. But I am glad I took this program because it kind of just like accelerates everything and it's getting me closer to where I want to be a little bit faster.
Yeah, totally. I think I know somebody who's in the weekend cohort and it's like years and years and years. Like it's
Yeah,
like
it's a
4 to 5 years or something. And like sometimes
Yeah.
for school, it's just like you just need to get it over with. You know what I mean? Like just
Mhm.
just be done.
Get it done.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
totally.
I'm not, I mean, yeah, I struggle a lot with sitting down and doing papers and reading scientific papers. So if I can avoid that and get into the practical stuff,
Yeah.
that's what I want. So,
And from what I've heard, I don't think it was from you, but I think it's just from other people that I know that have done Masters of Counseling at various schools. And they're like, honestly, like you don't really learn all that much about how to actually be a counselor in school. And it's all just in the practicum that you actually learn how to do the thing.
yeah, which makes me feel a bit better, Laurie, that you said that, because sometimes it feels like a little bit like that, where I'm like, what the hell am I taking from this that I can actually pull into being a counselor, right? Um, but I will say that the some of the most learning I've done has been from other people's lived experience that they've shared with us and as a cohort. And I feel like I've learned so much on just, okay, how to approach things in a different way or just gaining better understanding of different people's experiences, I think has been so helpful. And of course, I am learning stuff for sure, but I feel like putting it into a practical sense right now seems like, whoa, that seems so far-fetched, even though it is quite near. But yeah, from what I've heard, practicum is the place where you do learn the most and grow the most.
Yeah, totally. I think you'll be fine once you get there, especially because you have your own lived experience. Like, you know how to be with people and like provide safe space for people. And that's really like 80% of what it is, right?
Totally,
Um,
yeah.
so you reached out over or Facebook and Instagram because I didn't answer your first message because I'm horrible at answering my messages. And basically said like we just finished some education about BPD in our cohort, and like it was really stigmatizing and like bad. Would you be willing to come and like talk to our cohort about what it's actually like and like kind of share a different narrative, which I thought was so beautiful. And like I said in the introduction, like just such a good example of like true allyship of saying, hey, this isn't right. I want to change this somehow and take it into my own hands to change it. A few like initial thoughts that I just want to share before we kind of get into that conversation. So one, you had said like, oh, my cohort can like put money together and like help pay you to do this. And I was like, well, the school should pay me, not you guys. Which like I very much appreciate the offer, but I mean, honestly, this it should be the school's responsibility. And I just wish that schools did more in terms of people with lived experience, like in part of their like actual paid staffing. But that's another conversation. The other really interesting thing is when you shared this with me, I asked what school you were going to. And interestingly, very, very interestingly, it's the same school that a very close family member of mine just graduated from in the same program. And when I say very close, I don't mean like we have a close relationship, but like a immediate family member. And this family member, right as she was graduating, decided that I was like a bad person and cut me out of her life completely. And it's kind of caused a lot of interesting family dynamics and all this stuff. And it felt very weird to many people that this attitude shift had happened because we'd had a really hard time growing up, obviously, because like I had serious mental illness and was not treated or diagnosed. But we had been working on repairing our relationship for many years. And so it just seemed very out of left field that suddenly, with no like precipitating event, there would be this like full cutoff. And so I just thought it was super interesting that this person would have probably gone through the same like courses that you're going through and hadn't reached out to say like, hey, can you do a better job of like explaining this? And then also maybe some of the stigma that you were hearing in your cohort or in your classes contributed to this decision on this person's part. So super interesting. I've also had at least one individual from that same school reach out to me to say, hey, I just graduated this program and I have BPD, but I haven't told anyone. So there's a lot of weird things coming out of this program about BPD, but none of them are the same. Like it's very interesting to me. So I'm curious, like what prompted you to want to reach out and what were you hearing that really like kind of stuck with you that was negative?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And first of all, I so appreciated when you shared that fact about an immediate family member cutting you out. And I was like, whoa, that to me was just like not an aha moment. I guess that's not the right word, but I was just like, whoa, that made it so much more real for me, not, not even being in your life, but just like hearing that, I was like, oh my gosh. Because you would think that going through a counseling program, you would become more aware, more empathetic, and more compassionate towards people with various different diagnosis and challenges. So that's what I would hope, right? So like hearing that was like a whoa moment for me. And I appreciated you openly sharing that with me. The reason
It's also scary because this person is now on her own counseling. And it's funny because
right, exactly.
it's a
Yes.
very small world. It's very weird. We don't live in a small area, but literally the day that I spoke to your cohort, somebody reached out to me and said, hey, I just saw this person on the like psych info or whatever, like the counseling list. Would you recommend her as a counselor?
Mhm.
And it was the person in my family.
Oh.
And I was not really, to be honest. Just like I feel really like worried for clients that have BPD that are seeing counselors who like clearly have so much stigma
Mhm.
because like that is eventually you can't separate that, I don't think, fully, right? Like
For sure.
it's going to impact your relationship. But anyways, sorry.
No, yeah, no, I totally agree. I think there's a fine balance between as a counselor saying, "Hey, this topic or this challenge hits too close to home, and I'm not going to be able to provide care that's not going to have countertransference where like my lived experience or what I'm thinking is going to negatively impact your therapeutic journey." There's a difference between that. And in my mind, that's being ethical where you know where there's boundaries and where your specialty is and where you should focus on versus being like, well, I learned about this in grad school. I just trying to think of like what she would have learned or what she realized in maybe the program that would have caused her to do that. Because that was like so, I'm sure you were so blindsided by that,
Oh,
right?
it was nuts. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It
So
was absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, and it maybe wasn't just about the program,
for sure,
but it's still interesting, right? Because
it is
you hear
interesting.
the stuff about like manipulation and violence and like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
untreatability and stuff. And it's like, well, these are the things that you're going to be hearing in a program that's stigmatizing people with BPD.
For sure.
And those are the kind of things that are going to make you not comfortable being around somebody.
Yeah, exactly. So the reason I reached out was, first of all, the prof that we had for um, pathology and psychopharmacology. Oh my goodness, a mouthful. To be fair, it was her first time teaching that course. That's a whole separate thing where I could go into like, why am I paying so much money for somebody to teach their first course and be their guinea pig? I have feelings about that. That aside, the way, and this went for all disorders where it was very much like reading from the DSM and then kind of hearing her experience as a clinician, working with clients with different diagnosis. And for BPD, we obviously were reading from the DSM, and then she kind of gave her perspective on things, which I found like a bit too just negative, and it wasn't very, I don't know, I really want to be a clinician that provides hope for people. And the fact that she was saying like, oh, like you'll get burnt out and all these things, or it's really hard to treat and all these things, and then we're coupling it with all the DSM like criteria. Well, that's not really giving us a lot of hope as counselors going out in the field working with certain populations, not just BPD, but other populations as well, because I kind of felt that was the pattern for especially certain diagnoses, BPD being one of them, being more stigmatized. And the funny thing is you are probably one of the only people that I know that openly, has that diagnosis in my life, right? So when I was hearing what she was describing of people that have that diagnosis, I was like thinking in the back of my mind, like, no, Laurie's amazing. Like she's married, she has a successful career, she's wonderful, all of these things. I'm like, why am I not hearing that side of things? Because all that we're doing is we're to these, counseling students, we're all just giving kind of instilling a bit of fear that working with this population is going to burn you out and they're going to try this and this and this. And I was like, well, I don't know. So I think I came in with that perspective, right? I was like, I know someone that's amazing that has that diagnosis and has been successful in treatment. Like, why aren't we talking about that? Right? Because now we're just going to have all these counseling students going out and being afraid of working with this population because they don't feel like they're equipped enough to work with that population. And they also might be getting a very one-sided perspective of what she views this population as being, right? So that was my concern. So that's why I basically reached out to you. I was like, "No, Laurie, you're doing great things. You need to come talk to us." And yeah, and make it a little bit more balanced because I felt like it was very unbalanced.
Yeah, I think that balance is really important, right? Because like, yeah, there's things about me and other people with BPD that are really challenging.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean that A, we don't deserve treatment. B, we don't have the ability to recover or do well in treatment, right? And like there's a bunch of evidence-based treatments for BPD now, and like those kind of attitudes around like untreatability is very outdated. Like that, that's 20, 30 years old that people were like, meh, it's like not treatable. It's just like a lifelong thing. It absolutely doesn't need to be. And I worry that like clinicians are going to just be like, it's kind of too much work, right? Like I want to have like positive
Right.
outcomes and like I want to like, help people. But if they're unhelpable, that's not a they're past help or whatever. Help non-helpable is not a word, but whatever it is now. Why would you go out of your way to like support that patient population? And there's also like a
Yeah.
huge component of self-fulfilling prophecy in that sense, right? Like, you said I'm one of the only people that come that that is like open about my diagnosis. Well, one of the reasons that I'm open about my diagnosis is because I want healthcare providers to realize that like there's people all over the place that have BPD that are living like quote unquote normal lives. And the issue is that we only really see people within the healthcare system that are struggling really hard. Right. And so it becomes this thing where you're like, well, the only patients that I know, let's say you're like a psych nurse or whatever, the only patients that I know are coming into ER because of suicide, self-harm, whatever. And so therefore all people with BPD have those issues. And so if you're never like seeing another perspective of that, then it's just going to keep reinforcing these stereotypes.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think from the perspective that our prof was giving, I think it was that, right? Like she is working with a population of people that are really struggling, and she is so fair, and I don't want to discredit her in saying that, like that was really challenging for her and it made her feel burnt out. Like that two things can be true at the same time, right? I just wanted a little bit more like hope and perspective of that it can get better, and through treatment things, someone can really live a fulfilling and beautiful life. Like that's what we're here to do, and help someone on their journey. So I just wanted a bit more hope and a bit more perspective from that side, because I could see even in our conversations and discussions, like people were getting scared, and that's not the way I wanted people to feel, because I was just like, no, there's hope there, and we don't want to paint people as their diagnosis either, right? And I just felt like for that particular like BPD, it was a bit too like connected to someone's identity too, like that's how I felt. So I also know too, just being someone that has spoken about my lived experience to a room full of doctors, how helpful it can be with someone with lived experience to come educate, because who knows the challenges more than the person that's living with them. I mean, come on, those are the people that need to be telling us, and telling us too, like what works and what they need and what doesn't work too. I feel like that's so helpful, and we are so lacking that in our program. There are some people with diagnosis in our program that openly share in discussions and stuff, but there's also some diagnosis that don't have any. There's no one in our cohort that do have, so
Or that feel
we're missing
comfortable
that. Or
sharing.
feel comfortable.
Yeah.
That's true too as well. But I mean, I think most people are pretty comfortable sharing now. But yeah, I mean, if you're getting that type of education on that kind of diagnosis, who would want to share on? Yeah. So
Yeah.
I get that too.
Yeah, because it's scary. Yeah,
It
like
is scary for sure.
totally. Out of curiosity, did they talk about treatment in this psychopathology? And
They did, yes, definitely talk about treatment. But the thing is like the way that course was structured, it was very much like, here's the diagnosis, here's the criteria for the DSM, and here are some treatments, without really going more into that, more than that, because that's kind of all that you were allowed time for, really, for
right.
that. Because there's so many disorders in the DSM, and we only had certain amount of weeks to get it in. And to be fair, it was also her first time teaching too. So it was a bit of like figuring out what's working for our cohort and what's not. And yeah, that course, I feel like, yeah, I didn't get a ton out of that course, to be honest. I got more out from people sharing out their lived experience from like family members or their own lived experience. But yeah.
Well, and you can also just Google the DSM.
Well, that's exactly right, right?
Right?
Like I don't need to be regurgitating it in class, and that's what it felt like a little bit.
Yeah. And you also,
So
you're not going to be able to diagnose people anyway. So
no,
it's like, okay,
no.
cool. I can just Google it next time. Like, I don't need to pay
Well,
you 50 grand to read the DSM, but whatever.
the interesting thing about that is there are a lot of people in our program that are in Alberta. So they're planning to register as a psychologist once they do their provisional hours because in Alberta
Oh,
you don't need a PhD to become a psychologist. So they could technically diagnose people if they became a psychologist. So there are things about the program where you kind of like work through assessments and different things where you could kind of result in a diagnosis for somebody. But yeah, sometimes it seems like it's focused on the psychologist side, and I'm like, here, yeah, that's not gonna be me. So where do I fit in this
yeah.
puzzle, right? But yeah, I feel like I want to say around half our cohort is trying to become psychologists in Alberta because most folks are in Alberta.
I literally did not know that that's how that worked in Alberta.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Everywhere else, every other province across the country requires a PhD that I'm aware of. That requires a PhD. BC for sure.
Yeah.
Alberta is one of the ones where if you have your right amount of, school credits and the right topics and then your provisional hours and you pass an exam, then you can become a psychologist, which is quite
Hmm.
interesting.
Yeah. Wow. That's really, really interesting. I'm like, you should move to Alberta.
I
You can
know,
afford life too.
right? But yeah, I mean, listening to going through all the hoops they have to go through to become a psychologist would be like,
Mm.
it's almost easier just to stay in BC and get a PhD, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. True. Yeah.
I did
Honestly.
think about it though for a minute and I was like, I really had to think about what my goals were
Mhm.
and was I just, trying to get the psychologist title versus like what I actually
Exactly.
wanted to do, right? So,
Yeah. If it's like, it doesn't sound like it actually makes all that much difference. If you're getting the same
no,
education anyways, like yeah,
no,
you may
no,
as well stay here and help
no.
people. So I did come talk to your cohort or like a group of your cohort members. We did it
Mhm.
over Zoom and I thought it went really well, but I'm curious as to like your perception of their interest and the stuff that we covered and anything else.
Yeah, I think it went so well. Obviously, we only had like, I want to say 13 people-ish that came out of a class of 22. Obviously, people have their own lives and stuff, so
Yeah, I was
it's
like,
to be
that's actually
expected.
honestly pretty good
Okay,
given it was like outside of school hours.
that's
Like
fair.
nobody actually wants to like go to a second lecture the same
For
day.
sure, yeah. And yeah, I mean, it was so well received, I think. I mean, you saw how engaged our cohort was with questions and stuff. And I knew that. And I invited you knowing that our cohort would receive what you had to say really well because our cohort is always trying to question things and, make sure we're looking on both sides of the coin and that kind of thing. So I knew it was going to be super helpful. And I also knew that there was some folks that have worked with populations that have had BBD and also had some lived experiences within their like family unit. So I thought it would be helpful having somebody come in and in my opinion went so well. I feel like you just you painted a picture that created a lot of hope for like what we can do to support folks with BBD and I feel like that was the most rewarding things to watch.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, it was a very engaged group and like we could have talked for hours. You know what I mean? Like I also wanted to make sure that I got some of the like actual content in because I felt like maybe there was some like facts that were missing from that group, right? Or from the what you'd already learned. So maybe just for like the people listening to this, basically an overview of what I did is I talked a little bit about myself and like my experience, and I tried to focus on it was maybe like a couple minutes, but focus on the things that like I've been told I would never achieve because of BPD, right? Like I'm married, I have a family, I have a house, I have a grad degree, like, all of these things, like I'm actually happy, like all of these things that like people with BPD are told that they're never going to be able to have. And then talked a little bit about like the DSM criteria, but also how we can reframe the DSM criteria, not only like just within wording, because there's a few things that I'm like, it could be worded better, but then also talking about like the beautiful strengths that BPD brings us. And so, while they're not like diagnostic criteria, it's like these are all of the positive things that come with this diagnosis that like we should be celebrating. And then talked about some myths that are really common, just to try and like break down some of those really commonly held misconceptions. Talked a little bit about treatment options. Obviously, like I'm not a clinician, but just to make sure that people know that there are treatment options out there. And then provided some resources, and also put together like a little handout as well. So I can actually probably post that somewhere so that if anybody wants to download the handout, they can, just because it might be helpful. Yeah. And then just like some ways that clinicians can better support and help destigmatize, because I think that's really important too. So it seemed like it went by so fast, but was definitely like an engaged group who had really like good questions. And I hope that like, we recorded it. Maybe people will watch it that weren't there, or like even if it can be shared with other cohorts, anyone, right? Like I think this education, not just for BPD and not just myself, should be included in like all schooling for mental health.
I completely agree. I think it's really difficult, I feel like, to fully kind of empathize, and I feel like you gain the most learning from hearing someone speak about their own experiences. And I feel like for things that are, I guess, more widely talked about, and I guess you could say just more common, like depression and anxiety, I feel like, and ADHD, we have a lot of folks with ADHD in our program. Just like open talking about that in our classes has been very helpful, but we're definitely missing that lived piece with a lot of other mental health challenges. And I think that is so helpful having that. And we'll hear it for sure in our sessions, but if we're only getting one side of like what the DSM says and all these things, and I have to say, not all our profs are like that. I think for that particular course, however, it would have been very helpful to have a more balanced approach to introducing various different, diagnoses that we may have not been familiar with before, right? So that's where I think it was lacking a bit for that particular course. I feel like it was not planned out very, very well and effectively, that was going to set us up for being, successful and working with various different populations. So that's my gripe with that particular course.
In any of your courses, was there an intentional inclusion of lived experience though?
So it always comes, so we've never had somebody come in to speak as a guest, for example, as a lived experience, kind of like what you have done for us on the side. But there's always room for discussion of lived experience within the room. So our cohort is very diverse in the sense that we have so many people who have so many different experiences. And I think that's where I mean is where we get the most learning, is from sharing other people's stories. But that's what I'm saying. There's a gap where there isn't someone that can speak to that. We're only getting whatever, the program wants to pump out as the education for that piece.
Yeah, and I think that's just an issue with all education, right? Is like academia is so focused on like supporting their own, if that makes sense. Like, oh, well, I'm going to have this like researcher come on and talk about something or whatever. And it's like, great, but that's not actually why we're here, right? And so I think that's the case in like almost all programs. And I am glad that they did have like an intentional time for people with lived experience within the cohort to share. My goal for like the future is that all programs have actual like paid people with lived experience involved in the training.
I agree. By the way, I agree. I think that is what we need. It just creates a more well-rounded experience. And I would say too, for beyond like counseling, like all healthcare, right? Because I feel like
Mm-hmm.
we have wonderful doctors, and we also have doctors that don't are missing that piece of empathy and compassion and trying to understand you as an individual. And I think we need more of that, and we're not getting enough of that in the healthcare system as well. Like I see it and hear it from different people like experience in the healthcare system, and I'm like, wow, they really need to couple it some other pieces in there that are
Mm-hmm.
really essential to being an effective doctor and a doctor that actually resonates with people.
And that's kind of how you and I met, is doing like, there was a lot of things, but presentations a lot of the time to physicians and healthcare workers about our own lived experience with various things, right? And like, I wish that there was more of a mechanism to do that formally. Like that project is over, but we're all still out here doing cool stuff, which is amazing. Like all of the people that were involved in that program or that project. But yeah, it would be nice to have like, one dedicated place where like all of us could find these opportunities. And yeah, maybe one day.
It really should be part of the curriculum
Yeah.
for sure. I
Yeah.
think
Like
it
part of
really should.
accreditation for schools where they have to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, were there any other diagnoses that you were learning about that felt very stigmatized?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I think it's all the ones that kind of have like the labels, like certain perceptions in society. So like schizophrenia, narcissistic personality disorder. I can't say, I don't remember exactly like what was said about those, but I feel like there's always a bit of an underlying thing going on there.
Yeah.
I shared a very recent experience of a family friend who had schizophrenia that actually passed away under healthcare due to like negligence, in my opinion. And
Oh,
I
wow.
explained that to our cohort that there's so many diagnoses out there that people are just labeled with them in healthcare, and then they just get such poor treatment. And it was so evident there for that particular friend of like my family that I grew up with, and it just honestly hearing that devastated me. And I just, yeah, I try to share where I can basically on those things that I can speak to about, but yeah, I would say those three are probably the ones that stick out to me, that I feel like if anything, because we know those diagnoses are so stigmatized, we should be making sure we are getting the other side, right? And I feel like there wasn't enough of that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, well, first of all, I'm so sorry about your family friend. I wish that I was surprised, right?
Yeah, exactly. Are
I
we
really
surprised?
wish.
No.
Yeah, every time I hear stories like this, I wish that my reaction was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe that happened." But I can. And that's even more tragic. And also your family is all in the healthcare field.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, yeah, they
like,
were livid. Yeah, when they
yeah,
heard. But
yeah. Anyways, I'm so sorry to hear about that. But then yeah, I mean, we hear about, unfortunately, we have a mutual friend that had passed away who was a
yeah,
strong advocate for schizophrenia as well. And the work he did was just spectacular. And like,
mhm.
I know we all miss him, but if anybody here is listening and is interested, his name is Brent Seal. You can find him online. But just so many good people in the world that could be doing this kind of education that just aren't. And I know like even for people like Brent, he was a huge like supporter of mine when I was kind of thinking about going into this kind of advocacy space. And the big issue is like it's not well paid,
No.
right? You might get like a $50 honorarium if you're lucky, or like things like this podcast. Like I think we are officially breaking even, but I think the first 2 years we like lost money every month. And so it's like, you do it because you love it, but it's not feasible for like an actual job 90% of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's really interesting. And I just so appreciate that you took the initiative to go out of your way and like set that up. And I think I'm going to try and record because I don't want to record the one that I did, or I don't want to post the one that I did with you guys just because people did share their lived experience and I didn't ask for that explicit consent. But I might record me doing that presentation again just on my own for the sake of like hopefully making that more accessible to other programs. I don't know, right? Like there's got to be a way to get this information out there.
Yeah. No, I think that would be very helpful. It's just a matter of if programs prioritize
Yeah,
putting that education out there, right? But yeah, you're so right. I feel like there's it's such an interesting piece where we pay so much money for somebody with a piece of paper to tell us about a disorder that they've probably never lived with, blah blah blah,
yeah,
and but have maybe diagnosed, for example, because a lot of our profs are psychologists, but we don't bring in the people that are living with that day to
mm-hmm.
day, right? So I think both perspectives are helpful, mind you, but why are we only getting
Totally.
one perspective?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
100%. Both are important. The interesting thing though is like research shows that the best way to reduce stigma is have interactions with people with lived experience of the disorder. So it's like if
Whoa,
you were to
you would
actually,
think that's crazy. That
yeah, I know it's like so bizarre right now, but yeah, like that's actually like an evidence-based model for stigma reduction, and it's like, well,
hello,
duh.
counseling programs, you wanna
Yeah,
get in on that?
exactly. Because like stigma is so vital, like
Mhm.
to try and combat in these programs because like if you're going out into the world and you hear somebody has BPD and your attitude changes about them as a clinician, well, that's not helping anyone.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Yeah, you
yeah,
know what? Speaking of stigma, I think the big thing that they try to tackle mostly is like being open to different cultural dynamics, right? Because like, your perception of how you think someone should handle a problem might be different
yeah,
culturally for them, what's important and all those things. So I think that they've done a good job on having us reflect on that. But there is that missing piece of just somebody with the disorder that is, highly stigmatized. Yeah, not getting that message out there. I think we're missing that piece. It's still very much from the clinician point of view, and depending what clinician is coming in and teaching us, right? We're getting that one perspective from this one course that's focusing on this, on uh pathology, right? So
yeah. It's just unfortunate that it's that
it
course,
is, yeah,
right?
that course.
Other courses it would matter less, I think.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. All right. Well, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you really wanted to touch on today?
Um, I don't think so. I think we've chatted through things, unless you have some burning tea questions you want to ask me. But
I wish. No, I don't have anything really in particular. I think this has just been such a good conversation. And like, I mean, I'm always happy to chat with you, but I really hope that this inspires other programs to do similar things,
Mhm.
even if it's like grassroots like you did, or even better is incorporating it directly into the education.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. And yeah, I want everyone to know that we, a lot of the students out there, we are constantly questioning things on how they're taught and if we're getting the full picture and that kind of thing. We are out here.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can honestly say I think most of us in the program just really want to be effective therapists and counselors or psychologists. And yeah, I think sometimes we don't always pick up on on things that are being portrayed in a certain way, but when we can, I think the majority of us want to get the full picture. And so, yeah, hopefully that presentation, actually, I know that presentation is going to help those of us that were there be better supporters in the mental health field. So I appreciate that, Laurie. I'm so grateful for you, and I'm so just grateful for the work that you're doing because it's so important.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful you reached out. It honestly meant the world to me. I'm so excited that it happened.
And I'm glad.
Yeah.
I felt like I was like, oh, am I gonna bother?
No, not at all. I'm just so bad at answering messages. No, I was like beyond stoked actually. It was probably like the highlight of my month. So I just super appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, I also know I need to be careful about, I don't want to always like have the same person have to preach the same thing. So I wanted to be mindful of that as well and make sure that you were actually like for it, right?
Right. No, very for it.
That I wanted to be just careful about that. But I'm so happy you were willing to do that, and we are genuinely so grateful for that because we really did need that.
Totally. Well, thank you so much. You're going to be such a good clinician, and I'm just so happy that I get to know you.
Yay! Yeah, you too.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Superfeeler podcast. Today's episode was recorded on the unceded and traditional territory of the Matsqui and Sumas First Nations. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps me reach more listeners like you, and we're always looking for improving the podcast. Remember, you can always stay connected with me on social media. You can follow us. The show notes will have all of the details for Instagram profiles. If you want to support the podcast and help me continue to bring great content, please consider joining the Superfeeler community on Patreon. Your support really means the world to me, and there's a variety of different options for support, including some free ones. For all information about the Superfeelers Club, which is the peer support that we run, including upcoming events and resources, head over to Eventbrite or laurieedmondson.com for more information. And if you have a topic that you want me to cover or a guest you'd love to hear from, please send me the suggestions. Always happy to hear them. Until next time, keep on superfeeling and living authentically. This is Laurie signing off of the Superfeeler podcast.